English translation. 670th contact. Part 1. Wednesday, the 11th of January, 2017, 14:57 hours.
Ah, there you are already, Ptaa. Welcome and greetings, dear friend.
I also greet you, Edouard, dear friend, and I have come here as quickly as I could, for it is evidently urgent that you have instructed Florina to report to Quetzal and me and to ask for our advice. You have enabled Florina to inform us that we are to judge a matter in regard to its handling, following which Quetzal and I have found according to what you had to explain. 3. However, it was and is not entirely clear to us what the whole thing is about because you did not tell Florina the exact context so that we could judge the matter neutrally. If you now want to clarify, please, what the whole thing is about, then I can contact Quetzal, whereby we can then give our advice.
You raised the issue right away, but it really would not have rushed you to come here today, because the matter will not be finally discussed until the third weekend.
But currently I am here, consequently we can now talk about it and give advice. Therefore, please.
Naturally. See here, this letter is what it is about if you want to read it, please.
Thanks, now I understand what it is about. But now I need to know why Quetzal and I are to decide on this.
2 factors are given. Respectively, 2 reasons are given for the request. This is clear as far as it goes. But it turned out that the first factor or reason is already declared null and void at the beginning of the letter with the second sentence, because it does not want to be presented and discussed, which was also confirmed verbally. I do not want to presuppose anything more about this, but I want to hear your opinion and Quetzal's opinion, because I want to hold back my own opinion, and I do not want it to be said that I influenced you both and interfered in something that actually only the group has to determine. But not I. But I am the leader and I am responsible for this. But I am the leader and I am responsible for ensuring that correct and proper action is taken and decisions are made. Which is why I vetoed the decision and suggested that I seek your advice if it was accepted, which it was.
So therefore it is important for you that I consult with Quetzal and that we should also come here. But unfortunately this is not possible for him today, which is why I will now call him and submit to him what your request is, which I now understand. I have to go back for that, but you can come with me if you want. It will only be a short time when I will confer with Quetzal.
No, I will wait here until you come back.
It is your will. Then...
There you are again. That was really quick. It only took about 20 minutes. The dimension gate is really something practical, but what decision have you come to now?
In my opinion, your problem lies in the assessment of the writing, namely, which of the 2 justifications can or may be brought to bear.
Exactly, that is the problem.
Quetzal and I think that you have argued correctly, and pointed out that you have declared the first pro forma justification as null and void, because only the second justification may be taken into account, precisely as a result of the first one being revoked, which is clear from the letter precisely that it is also not spoken about and not discussed, because there is therefore no speech and answer given for it. However, this fact requires that the second reason is stated as an effective fact and is also represented orally. You have therefore acted correctly by raising the veto and thus an official objection in order to delay and also prevent a wrong decision from being made and a wrong decision from being carried out.
You thought correctly. And of course Quetzal too, because that was and is exactly the point. Because I intervened because I considered the first mentioned reason irrelevant and only the second one relevant and logical. Since the first reason was already revoked in the letter and then also orally, precisely because it was said that it would not be discussed, it was logically clear to me that it could not be used for the desired decision. Also, in my view, the subsidiary reasons or symptoms associated with it and mentioned in writing and orally were logically not allowed to be brought into play for the assessment or decision-making because they were solely focused on the factor or reason that was mentioned first but revoked in writing and orally.
which you have judged correctly and exercised your right of veto in a perfectly logical manner and avoided a wrong resolution.
Thanks to both of you. But if you're not in a hurry, I have one more question.
I am in no hurry, besides I still have some of what you requested from my father's time with you.
Good. I am glad to hear that. As well as that, you have enough time to talk. As I explained to you regarding the book Researching a Real UFO, which some people have written as a practical guide to WCUFO experimentation for young scientists, according to their research and clarifications by which they can prove that my photos of the cake ship and the surroundings where it was photographed in each case are real and therefore not a hoax. So this book is now available for purchase on Amazon for 37.22 euros.
That is pleasing.
I also think so. But while we are on the subject of books, I have a question about the royalties or percentages that an author is entitled to from his or her works. I'm asking because I'm interested in how you look at it in terms of how royalties or percentages should be calculated.
If I assume that you have your books printed by other publishers and sold by them, that is where your question is going, then the net sales revenue is relevant for royalties. This net sales revenue determines the royalties or the percentages that you then receive.
And what do you mean by net sales?
This is the final profit revenue that is left after deducting the cost of production, distribution, and any shipping costs.
If I understand correctly, I can define it like this. If I now write a book, for example, and have it printed at a price of, say, CHF 20 and sell it with all the ancillary expenses at CHF 30, then I have to calculate the CHF 10 as net sales revenue, which counts as the effective profit.
That is correct.
So, if I understand you correctly, royalties or percentages cannot be calculated on the basis of the actual final sales price and your own expenses, but only on the basis of the effective profit. But if the total sales price were to be taken as the basis, what would you say that should be judged as in terms of the author's percentage right?
As an over-involvement of the author person or even as fraud.
Aha, that was also how I viewed it. Thanks for your assessment.
Then I can now reproduce your first letter, which you first sent to governments and the public media in 1949.
Open letter from Saturday, the 7th of July, 1949, to governments and the public media in Europe.
Absolutely certain predictions for the future of Europe and the whole world have been pointing to terrifying events that will inevitably occur since the end of the World War in 1945 and also as of today in 1949. These are absolutely certain predictions whose occurrence and fulfillment will be inevitable. They are not prophecies that can be changed or averted depending on the behavior of the human beings on Earth. Foresights or predictions, therefore, have nothing to do with prophecies. For a foresight corresponds to a view into the real future, in which the foreseen events effectively take place and consequently cannot be changed. And what the future will inevitably bring is the following. Already in a short time, the climatic conditions in Europe and in the whole world will begin to change in a negative way, for which the humanity of the Earth will bear the main blame, which will be caused by damage to the whole of nature and to the fauna and flora. Namely serious damage, which will be caused as a result of the needs and desires of the rapidly growing overpopulation. The rapidly increasing overpopulation means that the Earth's resources are being exploited more and more frequently and radically, and that the entire environment is also being increasingly polluted and even destroyed, not only fields, forests, meadows, and floodplains, but also all oceans and inland waters. In the coming decades, fields, meadows, and floodplains, as well as oceans, lakes, rivers, and streams will be contaminated with a wide variety of waste, which will pollute, sicken, and kill aquatic and terrestrial life, especially when they try to feed on the waste. It is predicted that, on the one hand, in the coming decades and well into the next millennium, plastics in particular will be the most destructive materials in this respect, affecting the entire environment and causing death to a great many living creatures. On the other hand, there will also be many kinds of chemical poisons that will be released into fields, meadows, floodplains, forests, gardens, and the atmosphere in order to protect food plants, etc., from pests or to promote plant growth. This, however, in addition to the emergence of extremely intensive agriculture and horticulture, will lead to the death and extinction of many living organisms that previously ate the pests. But the intensification of agriculture and horticulture, which will lead to, for example, meadows being driven to higher production with an emerging artificial fertilizer and being mown several times during the year, will lead to bird life suffering and rapidly diminishing and in some cases even being wiped out, be it songbirds or birds of prey. The same fate will also befall animal and animal species, which will be robbed of their habitat in the future by the needy and greedy machinations of the inexorably increasing overpopulation, because earthly mankind is destroying more and more fertile and vital cultivated land, be it through countless new residential and work buildings, factories, sports facilities, ski slopes, roads, paths, railway lines, and bathing establishments, etc., etc. Many aquatic species will also be deprived of their habitat and various species will be wiped out, with overfishing of the oceans and inland waters being the main cause of the disappearance of aquatic species. Overpopulation will also be to blame because their need for fish food can only be met by overfishing and completely exploiting the seas and inland waters. Many birds of various species, be they songbirds or birds of prey, nocturnal birds, aquatic life of all kinds, insects, reptiles, amphibians, butterflies, spiders, all kinds of animals and creatures will become extinct through the fault of the human beings of the earth, because they will destroy a great deal of it through their irresponsible interventions in the whole of nature and its fauna and flora. But this will not be all, because through the irresponsible and destructive interventions in nature and in the planet, it will be that also the climate and thus the weather conditions will be brought into chaotic turmoil, which will lead to tremendous storms, claim many human lives, and cause immense destruction. And the equally irresponsible machinations concerning the coming of many atomic bomb tests, which will find their continuation through hydrogen bomb tests, namely through the irresponsible affirmation of the same by Truman, the President of the USA, which will take place in January of next year, as well as through the irresponsible exploitation of the Earth's resources, will also affect the entire Earth's tectonics, which will lead to severe earthquakes and volcanic eruptions that will continue well into the new millennium. As early as next year, on the 29th of February, an earthquake in Morocco will claim around 13,000 human lives, but this will only be the beginning of many others. Volcanic eruptions will also follow, such as the Hibok-Hibok volcano on the island of Camiguin in the Philippines in 1951, as well as the Lamington volcano in Papua New Guinea, which will claim over 6,000 human lives. But the volcanic eruptions in the future will increase greatly, which will also result in the deaths of human beings in the tens of thousands, as will be the case with earthquakes and seaquakes. Everything in nature, its fauna and flora, the climate and the weather conditions will change radically through human fault. Enormous storms of all kinds will occur in such a way that they will cause immeasurable material damage to landscapes, houses, and all kinds of other buildings, but also to roads and paths, mountains, railway lines, torrents, streams, rivers, lakes, and even the beaches of all oceans. Hundreds of thousands of deaths will also be caused by the forces of nature, by climate-related upheavals, storms, mudslides, floods, tsunamis, and mountain slides into the third millennium, as well as millions of human lives through wars and terrorism. The climate will change precipitously because rapid and increasing global warming and climate change will already take place in the next few decades, producing enormous snowfalls, hailstorms, tremendous rainfall, hurricanes, typhoons, tornadoes, hurricanes, and other storms. as well as droughts, thunderstorms, and forest fires of unimagined proportions all over the world, and thus in South and North America, in the whole of Europe, in Asia and Australia. Huge damage will be caused. The seas will invade the land with storm surges, etc. Torrents and streams will become raging rivers, and rivers will become raging torrents, with wild waters overflowing all banks and causing tremendous floods. On all continents, huge areas of forests will go up in flames. Entire landscapes will be devastated by storms, and many human achievements and livelihoods will be destroyed. Europe will be hit by hurricanes and tornadoes for longer and longer. Just as much human work will be destroyed because it was built too close to the banks, on mountain slopes, etc., as well as in floodplain areas, which should basically be kept free of human housing. Factories and warehouses, as well as sports facilities, because these would have to provide the necessary flooding space in the event of wild and all-flooding floodwaters. As already explained, the first severe earthquake with many deaths will already occur next year, and in the following year also the first violent volcanic eruptions, which will also be followed by tremendously extreme earthquakes and seaquakes, whereby these will extend far into the third millennium and, becoming worse and worse, will then claim countless human lives. The beginning of the whole thing, which will bring much suffering, distress, misery, death, and destruction in the future, is still taking place on a small scale, but the more numerous the overpopulation becomes and the destruction of nature, its fauna and flora, as well as the atmosphere and the climate, increases and multiplies due to the irresponsible needs and desires of overpopulation mankind, the worse everything will become. Thus, in the course of the next few decades, a disaster will be in the offing that Earth humans will no longer be able to cope with, so that towards the end of the 20th century, everything will increase to such an extent and be carried into the new millennium that everything will then degenerate completely and get out of control in every respect. But this does not mean the end of the horrors. For once the new millennium has arrived, nature will rise up even further and more violently against the environmentally destructive madness of overpopulation-related machinations and reach masses reminiscent of primeval Earth times. This also in terms of storms that will increasingly degenerate into hundreds of kilometers per hour. But there will be other evils that will upset the future of humanity on Earth and spread great terror. Because many wars, uprisings, and bloody and unprecedented terrorism will become the scourges of earthly humanity, about which, however, more will be said later. If we look at and analyze what is to come in the near and distant future, namely up to the first decades of the third millennium, then it becomes clear that Earth humans themselves are to blame for the coming disaster and chaos, as well as for all catastrophes, even if pathologically stupid and irresponsible know-it-alls and scientists will claim otherwise. Fundamentally, overpopulation is without doubt the factor of all evils, respectively all their needs and desires, which are carried out by tremendously destructive machinations on nature and its fauna and flora, whereby inevitably also the atmosphere and the climate are influenced, which also leads to global warming, respectively climate change, and worldwide environmental destruction. Also, open prostitution and criminality, as well as an asylum seeker problem, and new Nazism will spread and create great problems, whereby this new Nazism will not only spread in America, but this will also be addressed again later. Against this and against all other evils in general, very harsh, effective and comprehensive countermeasures must already be taken and implemented today, as also against the world domination-addicted machinations of the USA, which instigate wars, revolutions, and political upheavals all over the world through power-obsessed and willing creatures and U.S. Secret Service manipulations, but also invade foreign countries and wage wars themselves with their own army. In doing so, they plunge them into chaos in order to use the mentality, religion, and politics of their populations to break the resistance against the USA and to exterminate all those who tend to oppose America. Due to the rapidly growing overpopulation, the USA is forced to exploit the Earth more and more and to destroy the environment, nature and its fauna and flora, in order to satisfy all the increasing needs and desires of all kinds of the inexorably growing world population, the number of which is predicted to reach about 77 billion by the turn of the millennium alone. The needs and desires of the growing overpopulation are increasing in relation to the number of humanity, through which the planet Earth, as well as its nature, fauna and flora, as well as the entire environment in terms of land, forests, fields, floodplains, lakes, streams, rivers, oceans, the atmosphere, and the climate are increasingly being affected in a very bad way and completely destroyed. The planet itself is being tormented, because nuclear and other explosions are disrupting the Earth's structure and triggering earthquakes that will increasingly lead to major catastrophes with many deaths in the future. Waters, nature, the atmosphere, and the near-Earth space are being polluted. The primeval forests are being destroyed and annihilated in a profit-mad manner, and the Earth's resources are being irresponsibly exploited. The order of the day and of the future would be to put an end to all the madness of Earth humans with regard to the ever faster growing overpopulation and all the resulting criminal destruction of climate change, which has already begun and will lead to catastrophic consequences in a few decades. But the predictions clearly suggest that all the destruction, devastation, chaos, and catastrophes will not be stopped. So all the bad things set out by the predictions cannot be avoided. But that does not stop me from continuing to call out that all the overpopulation madness and its destructive machinations must be stopped, and stopped very quickly, before nothing can be saved. This, however, requires that a worldwide and controlled birth stop be introduced, followed by an effective birth control, which will reduce the world population and keep it at a reasonable level. Only by this alone can the increasing needs and desires of earthly humanity be curbed and all the destruction associated with it be ended and reduced to a reasonable level. In fact, even today in 1949, a great deal of evil has been done to ensure that the predictions are inexorably fulfilled. And this is also in the respect that environmental pollution from fossil fuel engines of all kinds, as well as from smokestacks, etc., has become a problem. And this is so along with innumerable other forms of water, air, and general environmental pollution, as well as the destruction of cultivated land by more and more human constructions of all kinds, such as dwellings, factories, roads, and paths, as well as sports grounds, etc. These are parts of predictions that have been made so far and which are now to be made public. Together with the following poem, which shows what will result from the USA and the dictatorship union that will come into being in Europe before the turn of the millennium. Humanity must be enlightened, and all public organs are obliged to do this because they are the mouthpieces to the population. So it is desired that the whole thing be published in full.
America and the countries of Europe will tremble when freedom comes from the East with a hard hand. Oppressed by America and Europe, who, however, will be punished by a hard lesson for the world domination they wickedly cherish and thus put countries and peoples under dictatorships. The great bear will come, who brings freedom, Russian land that brings down all bondage that's been barked out of many mouths in America and Europe, as in many other countries around the world, but the bear from the East will destroy them and mediate to peace and freedom. But it will be a long time before then with lamentations, which are carried out into the world with tears, because evil, terrorism, dictatorship, hatred, and war deny peace and freedom victory. Power and greed for world domination tear the world apart. And in many countries, many a death cry rings out, because America, as well as Europe, carry out bondage and beat the people with war, hardship, and misery. The sowers of discord, whose actions are based on power, will be taught by the bear and proclaim to them that world power claims fuel evil discord, leading humanity to death and destruction. That's why the bear will tear up all America's evil, and Europe will be promised the same. When acts of G-Vault come from the world striking America, wars destroy everything in the world, all over. When the European dictatorship echoes the same thing in the screaming of murder from evil terrorism, then the bear will start biting the discord, and that will tear apart the Western forces' evil deeds. Bulak, the 7th of July, 1949, Edward Albert Meyer.
And now here I have the last predictions and prophecies of my father, which he made and told you, and which I now want to tell you, with which then in this respect, all those of his made records are integrated in all the conversations passed between the two of us, which you want to disclose. For my part, I am of the same opinion as you have mentioned several times recently, that all those predictions made by my father, by Asket, by my daughter Simyase, as well as by Quetzal, and by me in relation to your private spheres, should not be included in our contact conversation reports. However, if there are any other private or other parts of conversations between you and my father, Asket, Quetzal, and myself that you are interested in, then you can name them each, after which I will pick them out and transmit them to you.
That I also do not want to include and otherwise mention all the various predictions of your father Svath, which refer to details of malicious happenings in relation to inhuman machinations and occurrences. I stand by that. The reason for this is that I have noticed on various occasions that even simple predictions cause severe psychological problems in many human beings, who cannot cope with them or can hardly cope with them, and may then have to suffer from them for months.
We agree because I feel the same way about this.
The time is now slowly approaching when the newly elected U.S. president will be sworn in, which will not please many of his opponents. Although Trump has a lot of supporters behind him, and he has also made many good promises, which he will probably also keep at his official inauguration speech. As I assess him, it will then be a matter of whether he can also realize all his assurances and assert himself against his advisors and adversaries and make the U.S. American people a governing people. It is also written in the stars whether he will be able to establish good relations with Russia and all the other states on Earth after he has made up his mind and withdraw the military and secret services etc. from foreign states, and whether he will not flirt with the EU dictatorship. But if he keeps his promises and stands up to his bad advisors and his adversaries, then he will be a good president, at least in terms of keeping his promises. But it will also be questionable whether he can shake up the U.S. establishment and hand over power to the people to a reasonable extent. What will happen next, however, is questionable, and I am particularly concerned about the military and military power, as well as the domestic economy, international trade, banking, and intelligence operations. And if I have already said something about the U.S. establishment being stirred up, it should also be said in Switzerland, because here, too, we have certain figures in the so-called government elite who should be removed from their posts, because they work in a damagingly high-handed manner against the people, and in this way also negatively influence the righteous in the federal government, the cantonal governments, as well as in the municipal bodies. The pro-EU dictatorship creeps are in the foreground, eager to hand over their own homeland and its people to a peace and freedom-despising, power-obsessed group of arbitrary rulers. And the worst thing about it is that all the righteous people in all the federal, cantonal, and communal bodies have to fit into an unfair concordance with regard to opinions and resolutions, etc., and consequently cannot effectively bring up and discuss what they think about freedom, peace, and the will of the people, and therefore also cannot put it to the vote. Although I do not interfere in the politics and governmental affairs of my native Switzerland, I have the right to form my opinion according to my findings, and I do so without becoming politically active. On the other hand, however, I must say that Switzerland is probably the country where, compared to all the states in the world, we generally have the best order with regard to politics, and that we have a good and sound federal constitution, and also a good administration of justice, even if it is limping on some points. In every other respect, too, I can only ever give precedence to my homeland, For as far as I have come to know many countries on earth, none can compare in every respect with the goodness of Switzerland. It is simply the case, since I am not politically active, that I also accept some things that I do not think are correct and that I would handle differently. Because otherwise, on the whole, apart from the exceptions mentioned, everything is correct in Switzerland, and every human being can be happy and satisfied who is protected and free in this country by the Constitution and the law, and can live in safety.
As for Trump, time will tell what will transpire. However, as for what you say regarding Switzerland and those popular leaders you associate with the U.S. establishment, I'm afraid your comments cannot be dismissed. And the fact that you hold your homeland in high esteem, even if certain governmental procedures of individual civil servants do not correspond to what would be correct in principle, that honors you just as much as your tolerance is worthy of recognition, which you show by accepting those who pursue their wrong behavior and put themselves in the foreground to the detriment of others, precisely of the people, and selfishly influence their co-governors, etc., by wrong opinions, demands, and resolutions, etc., and leave them no choice but to make wrong decisions. However, I must mention that you should not mention certain dates, events, and occurrences in the written account of our conversation in order to avoid fears and fright. It will also be good in future if you continue to refrain from going out in public, so that you also keep a low profile in relation to journalists, television and radio reporters, and other persons who want to question you and extract secrets or simply good knowledge from you. In future, this task should be carried out by all core group members who are well enough versed in the necessary topics to be able to answer questions and clarify everything that is important. You yourself are busy enough with the direct missionary matters and with all that you tirelessly work out for me and our spirit leadership concerning all the important spirit teaching values for us, which we may still experience and learn through you and your knowledge, for which I express all our thanks to you.
Which is not necessary, for I am also very grateful to you and to all of you, because in this way I can pass on teaching values that are not possible for me to teach here on earth. But with regard to your speech of restraint, reader questions and mission questions from human beings I know well, such as core group members, passive group members, and good acquaintances, surely there is nothing to prevent me from answering questions and having conversations that go a little further than just what I write doctrinally. And especially in this respect there is always a lot to explain, although I have to leave out everything that is just too high in value, such as just the facts that I work out for you and the spiritual guidance. Consequently, I am also always sufficiently busy and cannot be lazy, and sometimes have to be strictly concerned that I can also do all the necessary work that is required for direct missionary work. And all the other core group members also have to do this work, so each core group member is challenged according to his or her abilities and possibilities, and what they all contribute to the mission in a strict way, spending a lot of their free time on it and also helping financially so that the whole thing can flourish, is something that passive members outside the core group or uninvolved persons can hardly or not at all comprehend and also cannot voluntarily accept. Of course, all passive members, patrons and FIGU friends who ensure the running of the mission through their patronage contributions and donations also belong to those who co-finance the mission and all the necessary activities. But those who work strictly with us and spend their free time or holiday time to carry out the various necessary works around and on the center, as well as on the land, the center surroundings and forestry work, make a particularly great contribution.
This is indeed extremely worth mentioning, for which I also want to express my thanks for all the contributors in every positive way. Because as you say they all contribute a lot, I would even like to say invaluable services to the existence and implementation of the mission. But as far as your conversations concerning spiritual teaching and missionary matters are concerned, these do not, of course, fall within the realm of what you should no longer concern yourself with public relations. For these are direct mission-related questions and conversations which, after all, fall within your missionary duty. But if I want to talk about, for example, what happened at, then that was not good. because the whole thing was about highlighting something of one's own interest that got passionately involved in, which wanted to confirm a great feeling about one's own passion. If you look at it closely, there was a self-emphasis, an arrogance, and a self-congratulation, as you like to say in such cases, but also a fixation on persons and factors that are massively overrated.
That is how it appeared to Bernadette and I too. In our Swiss German and German language, we call this kind of behavior blind faith, blind fury, fanaticism, ardor, fervor, passion, unconvertible, unteachable, dogged or even obsessed, but also obstinate and naive. So this is also clear, also that I should no longer bother with people like, as especially not with journalists, etc., which I have not been doing for decades.
I know that, but I just wanted to mention it again because I came across in my mind. Your conversation in this regard was not useful because did not learn anything from it, but on the contrary became even more engrossed in the preconceived notion.
Misguided, you mean? But well, the facts are now clear.
That was my opinion.